that, we're moving to the first panel for day 2 of Partners Outdoors, day 2 of Great Outdoors Month, and the information about these wonderful people is in your book. We're not going to take any more time to introduce them, but Michael, Cirse, and Harry are wonderful, capable people of explaining some of the great things that have happened during the Obama administration and giving us some numbers, some facts, some ideas about how we make the case that these continue. So we have a little bit of change because Bob isn't here. Cirse is stepping in. But shall we go right down the roll? Do you have a order of speaking? Michael, it seems, first of all, Michael, we need to acknowledge, has been a hero in making sure that this month of June has been designated once again as Great Outdoors Month, so we acknowledge your help on that. It's not hard to be an advocate for that, but overcoming the inertia and overcoming the competition for everything else, if you look on the White House website, you see how many different events the president is asked to recognize and pay some time. We're delighted that the president also went out to Elkhart, Indiana yesterday, because if anyone knows about the significance of the economic revival that's taken place in Elkhart, which is the home of the RV industry in the United States, huge numbers of gains in manufacturing jobs because that industry, like the boat industry and other industries that are part of the recreation community, are thriving right now. So, Michael, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Derek. And I will try to save some time because I think that between what you've said and what Will said and the Secretary said, I think I'm done already. So I'll try to be quick. But thank you for doing this, Derek. Thanks for organizing this. It's hard to think of Great Outdoors Month without Derek Crandall. So we appreciate all of your work and leadership. I wanted to talk just a little bit about America's Great Outdoors. Talk about that premier conservation initiative that the president launched in 2010. And talk a little bit about how it started, what it's accomplished, and then where we are today. So I do want to acknowledge also that I put these slides together. I'm not good at PowerPoint slides, so I just put some pictures of my favorite places. So I haven't been to the Wave yet, but when I, like the Secretary, don't have a job next year and go on a road trip, that's number 1 on my list. So this initiative, this started in 2010, and the simple principle that America's Great Outdoors was founded on was that conservation is most durable and meaningful when it's built on local efforts. And so as the president launched this in April of 2010, what that essentially kickstarted was an unprecedented listening session and conversation with the American public. This has happened in previous administrations. The Reagan administration actually did a number of public meetings, but this administration took it to another level and had 51 listening sessions. So every state in the country, and then also Washington, D.C., to hear directly from the American people what it was that was most important to them. What were the conservation issues that were most important at the local level, at the national level, and took that really seriously. And heard from over 10,000 people, got comments from written comments from over 100,000 people. And from that unprecedented amount of public input, was able to put together a framework for policy actions and programs and initiatives that has continued to today. So at the beginning of 2011, there was a series of recommendations that was released that highlighted actions that could be taken broadly on virtually every type of issue related to the work that we all do, whether that's outdoor recreation policy, public education efforts, youth engagement efforts, river and waterway restoration, public land protection, historic preservation. It was the full suite of issues. And while that type of comprehensive approach didn't lend itself easily, I think, to being able to succinctly say what America's Great Outdoors was, or didn't lend itself to an incredibly compelling, easy communications strategy. lend itself to anyone being able to say easily, what is America's Great Outdoors, or what's a communication strategy, or how what is this thing to the American public? You can't answer that in one bullet point. What it did do was create this framework for where we could actually make progress and where we could do it with local community support, with buy-in, and really make progress in a swift way. Next slide. So what have we actually accomplished then? There's a long list of things that I think we've been able to do over the past 5 years, and I'll rattle off just a couple of them. I think that there's some great things that Cirse and Harry will talk about in more detail about how it is that across the administration we've been able to work to highlight the value of outdoor recreation, setting up the Federal Recreation Council to actually have this interagency approach to how it is that we coordinate on these issues and elevate awareness has been significant. How it is that we have created youth programs like the 21st Century Conservation Corps, knitting together existing networks and corps to be able to further increase jobs for youth is huge. Looking at protection opportunities to protect national monuments, as Secretary Bruell mentioned, has been significant. And then working with Congress where we can to increase funding for the outdoors through increased funding levels for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, working with Congress to make the enhanced deduction for conservation easements permanent, protecting more wilderness areas and national park units. All of those ideas and a lot more were included in that 2011 report. So I would actually encourage you guys to go back and look at that, because it's a document that didn't just live on the shelf. It's a document that truly guided the work that we've done. Now, one thing that I want to point out, instead of just listing additional items that we've accomplished all collectively, is to highlight one of the themes, I think, that has threaded this work together. Because one of the things that we heard first and foremost from the American public during those listening sessions was that the people in this country, the public at large, is increasingly disconnected from the outdoors. And that's especially the case for youth. And so I think that all of the work that America's Great Outdoors has been able to advance has really been focused around that idea of connecting and reconnecting more Americans to the outdoors. In part, that's through increasing awareness, increasing excitement. In part, that's through programs to get people outside. In part, that's been through creating more urban parks or restoring urban waterways so that there's actually more places for people to get outside. But the other part that I'm not sure is necessarily focused on as much, I think is perhaps the most important element, which is that the conservation efforts that have succeeded have engaged and centered on constituencies and communities in a significant and meaningful way. So conservation hasn't been advanced solely for the sake of conservation. Where there have been conservation opportunities, there's been an equal focus on ensuring that is being done in response to local communities, in partnership with communities, and ensuring that there's a benefit for these people. And I think that there's a particular brand of conservation that we have all collectively been able to advance as a result of that approach on communities and the partnerships that we've been able to build. I think that this room really well demonstrates. Next slide. So where are we now? I think that we're at an incredible place to be able to continue that work to establish more connections to the outdoors for all Americans. And both the Secretary and Will talked about it incredibly compellingly and articulately. I think the banner here that we can all use to achieve some of those goals is the National Park Service Centennial. And so while America's Great Outdoors provided a framework for where we can make progress, it didn't necessarily provide that easy, compelling message. And yet that's exactly what the National Park Service Centennial does provide. Because we know that the American public doesn't necessarily distinguish between national parks and national forests or national conservation lands or marine sanctuaries. But we do know that the national parks get people's attention and will get the press attention, and has already, as we heard the Secretary allude to, has already been making a difference in terms of actually reaching more people. So we are incredibly focused on working with as many people as possible to take advantage of this moment in time. We think that it's an incredibly exciting chance that we have, and for this to be our last year, to be able to help solidify and cement some of the accomplishments through America's Great Outdoors, provide more excitement and momentum going into the next administration. This is one way to help ensure that these gains that we've achieved are durable, and that our work that we've started here can most effectively and likely continue on into the next administration. And we think that there's the opportunity to truly use this as a way to reach people who we haven't been able to reach yet. And so for us, as we think about how we establish some of these connections, we're focused in particular on those underserved communities or Americans who haven't had the chance to enjoy these places. And we'd like to focus on that both in terms of how do we actually reach them? What are the most effective communication channels? Where can we reach them where they are? But then what can we do from a policy perspective to actually make sure that we're reaching them too? So later today, you'll hear more about about Every Kid in a Park, which I think is a central way to do that. But there's also policy actions that the Secretary mentioned and that Joe and the Forest Service are working on to make sure that we're breaking down barriers to make it easier for all Americans to get outside. And that we're working to ensure that these places are as inclusive of all Americans as possible. I think that there's some really key steps that we can take to ensure that we're protecting places that reflect the diverse culture and history of our country so that all people can see themselves in these places. And that we take whatever actions we can to ensure that once they get there, they feel at home. So what are the types of programs, the type of educational materials, the different ways that we can ensure that all Americans really do understand that these places belong to them, but then also feel connected to them personally. So I'll wrap with that. I think that there's an incredible amount of work that has been done under America's Great Outdoors, and it only would have been possible with everyone in this room working on it, everyone across the country working on these issues. But I think that we're at a really exciting time to be able to solidify that progress and to hopefully amplify it even more. So looking forward to continuing to work with you over the course of this next year. Thanks.
Great. So Bob Radcliffe apologizes for not being able to be here today. He did have a little bit of emergency, but he's doing well. And my name is Cirse Gonzales. I am the Executive Director of the Federal Recreation Council. So I'm going to be explaining to you a little bit about that. It did stem from one of the recommendations in the America's Great Outdoors report, and it was a recommendation to establish an integrated body on outdoor recreation. So the 7 public land and water agencies that manage lands and waters for outdoor recreation came together in 2011 to sign an MOU. That was later followed by a charter in 2014. And it basically established this integrated body that had been called for through the participatory process. That council, as of December, is now called the Federal Recreation Council, and it has really helped further the goals of the AGO report through the seamless delivery of outdoor recreation services and experiences. I think next slide. So it's not only been pretty critical for furthering the AGO efforts, but also in youth and education and conservation. And it's been instrumental in synchronizing the federal agency efforts and priorities and finding efficiencies throughout outdoor recreation in the national spectrum. Change slides, yes. So this is a little schematic of the concept in orchestration. There is a board. It's currently chaired by the National Parks Service. It rotates, though, and on that board sit basically the CEOs of our public lands and waters, right? The 7 principals of the Federal Recreation Council agencies. And they establish priorities. They set the council agenda. They also direct a working group, many of the members of which are here today, as Derek had mentioned yesterday too. They coordinate the day-to-day, they develop strategies, facilitate connections, and advise and implement on collaborative actions. So who is on it? Next slide, Ben. Yeah, this gives you an example of the people who are on it. The principals in the working groups, again, Secretary Jewell had alluded to the impact that these agencies have. Together, they manage more than 730 non-overlapping acres, which represents 1/3 of the nation's total acreage. And actually, they receive nearly 1 billion visitors each year. So if that doesn't scream impact, I don't know what does. They're also the only formal standing council that brings the 7 agency leaders together. They meet twice a year, and the Federal Recreation Council Working Group actually meets bi-weekly. So again, very demonstrated, it's a demonstration of the commitment and the passion that these people bring to outdoor recreation and that the agencies are supporting. So the next slide, I think, is on coordination. Yes. Basically, the role of the working group is to coordinate with the national outdoor recreation interests and organizations and other federal agencies as well. And the working group is to serve as the primary interface and central entity for soliciting public input. A lot of what we do too is to establish communication, education, and outreach strategies that really leverage and seek to build on the capacity of the outdoor recreation sector as a whole. So, is there a next slide? Okay, yeah. I will add here that the working group last year developed what they're calling the 4 cornerstone framework for sustainable operations. And that framework was to basically ensure that the administrative transition would be a seamless one. It was established based on the priorities that we had been addressing throughout the year, but also based on basically these 4 concepts that are to continue to be the bedrock of future agendas as we move into the new administration. So the 4 cornerstones that they identified are improving visitor data, enhancing the visibility and value of outdoor recreation, engaging the next generation of outdoor recreationists, and improving visitor services. So I'm not going to go into detail on what those 4 cornerstones have meant or how they help outline our work plan, but you can speak to me or some of the other Federal Recreation Council Working Group members who are in attendance. I'm happy to detail some of that. We have been working hard to implement some of the related work plan elements. We spoke about EKIP. The secretary today mentioned what we're calling the Outdoor Recreation Satellite Account, which has been a huge part of our agenda. And we hope to continue to work on these efforts and others into the new administration. So that's it for me.
Well, that was really good for probably finding out about 5 minutes ago that you had to do that. So that was good. And Derek, I come here from Colorado today where I live next door to the atomic clock. So we've always thought about going over and trying to stop time. And in fact, on the buildings there, and outside of one of the buildings, they have an outdoor clock that says 6:20 all the time. It's always 6:20. So maybe we can work on the outdoor atomic clock rather than the indoor. So thank you for being here. And another one of the big pieces that came out of AGO was this recommendation about the CCC. And the CCC was this great program for 9 years that had 3 billion young men doing all kinds of things like planting 3 billion trees and creating 800 national or state or local parks around the country. And more than anything, what it did is it created the foundation for our greatest generation, because the CCC boys went out and they fought World War II and saved and protected our country. And then they came back and became this greatest generation that we've had. And so the thought is, how do we do that now in the 21st century? And so the creation of the 21 CSC came out of the America's Great Outdoors report. But the thought was, we can do things differently now. It's not the 1930s anymore. We want to create and continue this great concept, but we can't do it in the same way. So probably the biggest difference is that the CCC was a government-run program. It was New Deal. That's what made sense in the 1930s. Coming out of the Great Depression, doing a government-run piece, the Army, heavily involved, Department of Labor, and of course Interior and Agriculture. But now the idea in the 21st century is, let's do it through partnerships. There are many other organizations out there that we can create a public-private partnership to have the same concept. Some of the other big differences, it's not just young men anymore. Of course, it's men and women, but more importantly than that, people who, as the Secretary talked about, don't often represent who the ongoing constituency has been of the parks. Let's get a group of people that look like America, and let's engage veterans, and of course, male and female. And then the CCC was about big public works projects, Yosemite and Yellowstone and things in the Grand Canyon, and we're still doing those with the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, but we can also do professional work of individuals who've been to college and have degrees and want to get back and want to get involved in this kind of piece. And so we created that greatest generation. Can we create a next greatest generation? And so the 21 CSC is really done with 4 different components: programs, participants, partners, and projects, all coming together to make this happen. And I'll work through each one of these. The first part is the programs. And so there are national programs out there. Mary Ellen represents the Core Network. There are others. Joe is here with SCA, Conservation Legacy, and so on. And then there are local programs all over the country. And at this point, 190 different programs have been recognized as 21 CSC. Almost all of them are nonprofits. A few are state or local government. I think 3 of them are different parts of the federal government. What they all do is they all agree to do these 8 principles that represent. They engage young people 15 to 25, veterans up to 35, U.S. citizens. They promote diversity and inclusion. They do specific terms of service. It's not full-time employment. They work in crews or as interns in individual placements. There's a component of professional development, participant development for the young people and the vets. They get paid in what they do. And there's a leverage investment that the programs bring to the table. And so that's the first part, are the programs. The second part are the participants. So each of these programs enrolls people as 21 CSC participants. And our latest count is somewhere 20 to 25,000 young people. It's a far cry from the 300,000 at the time of the CCC, but we have a goal of getting to 100. Right now, we're representative of where the Youth Conservation Corps and the Young Adult Conservation Corps were. And this is a sizable workforce to make a difference in our country. The third part is on partnerships, and this is a key area where many of the people in this room have been heavily involved. So the federal agencies and then the private sector, and Secretary Jewell talked about a lot of the private partners that come to the table to support this effort. On the public side, this is sort of a critical piece of how 21 CSC works, which is that there is every year millions and in fact even billions of dollars that are spent by the federal government and state, local governments on regular maintenance and operation, stuff that needs to happen anyway in parks and forests and BLM and other public and private lands and waters and tribal lands and waters. And 21 CSC people can come in and do this work. And the study that you can't read up there, but we have copies that Mary Ellen and I could give to you, shows that the Park Service went in and looked at a particular set of work, which was trail work, and found that when they engage a 21 CSC program, they get a 50% cost savings to get that work done. Regular work they need to get done everywhere. And they're just pieces. We're not going to do everything out there. We're not building visitor centers. There are an awful lot of stuff we're not doing. But for the slice that we are doing, we can come in and do it at a savings. And in fact, the Park Service this past year, and this slide says 25 million, that's actually a couple years outdated, because this year, the Park Service identified $26 million worth of projects just within the Park Service that they can get done with 21 CSC programs, over 300 projects that we're in the process of doling out and getting arrangements on the ground, all in their regular body of work, which is pretty neat. And the Forest Service, and Joe may, I don't want to steal Joe's thunder, but tomorrow or on Monday, the Forest Service is going to announce a major donation or contribution and partnership between Forest Service and National Forest Foundation for 21 CSC projects this year. It's supposed to come today, so I'll hold the thunder because it might be on Monday. The other part is on the private partners, and Secretary talked about the different groups from American Eagle and Coca-Cola and REI that have all joined in to be part of this. Many of them are doing sort of special initiatives. The North Face has a Never Stop campaign that engaged 21 CSC participants. Keen Utility has been out rebooting, giving boots to 21 CSC programs around the country. And then an important partnership, we've worked with Derek on the concessionaires, people like Delaware North and Xanterra that are working with 21 CSC programs, seeing that as another way to get their body of work done, which is neat. The final piece of the 4 participants, programs, partners comes together with doing projects on the ground. And we have projects on the ground in all 50 states, all over the country. The important piece is that it's not just physical work, it's professional projects. These are the kind of things people are doing, but just a small sampling of it. Recreation access, habitat restoration, wildfire protection, an awful lot of that, especially with veterans, disaster prep, historic preservation, and then all these kind of things you can take a young college graduate out to do around monitoring, planning, research, public engagement, which some of that is getting young 4th graders outside to do activities. So where do we go now and where are we with 21 CSC? There's been a lot of talk about the end of the current administration and where does it happen next. One of the big things is we have an act in Congress, the 21 CSC Act, led by Senator McCain. And what a neat way to sort of end one administration is to think back to 8 years ago when McCain, of course, ran against then Senator Obama. And here we have a 21 CSC Act that Senator McCain has led that is a perfect sort of partnership with President Obama, ending the administration on something that we can all agree on, which is let's get more opportunities for young people to come out. So this act is bipartisan. It's Senator McCain and Senator Bennett from Colorado in the Senate and in the House, led by Representative McSally, who is a Republican from Tucson, Arizona, and Representative Moulton, a Democrat from Massachusetts. It's a bipartisan bill and it's budget neutral. Supporting public-private partnerships, ultimately saving the government funds, and sort of moving the initiative into the future with congressional stamp of approval. So that we're very excited about and hope to get done this year. And then we have a partnership for the 21 CSC, which is a public-private group supporting the work that the 21 CSC is doing and doing some of the advocacy and background work to keep the initiative going. I think promoting 21C is a solution to 4 critical things. One is working on the backlog in public maintenance that needs to be done on public lands, resilience and preparing communities for disasters and some of the climate change that the Secretary talked about, engaging underrepresented young people, and helping vets transition. And then where we want to go with this, our results ultimately are we are going to reduce the maintenance backlog. We are going to make communities more resilient. And then we're going to develop this next greatest generation of young people and veterans who care about our public lands, have a vested interest in them, feel some ownership of them, and are emerging as advocates, stewards, and engaged citizens. So thank you.
Wonderful presentations. You know, I think this panel has set out the details that we need to follow through on. You know, number one, we have to recognize the importance of the career officials who will be part of the transition into the next administration. Make sure that this information is built in to the briefing books by each of the agencies, each of the departments, reflecting the kind of achievements here. Number two, we as the external, the exoskeleton, need to be praising this and in a bipartisan way, just talking about the importance of the substance, about the accomplishments and why this is significant. It doesn't matter if the next administration wants to call it something slightly differently. You heard Sally say that had she been there, it wouldn't have been the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps. She would have said CCC 2.0. Okay, if the next Secretary of the Interior, if the next president wants to rename it, if we get the same program, that's just fine. And the third thing is, how do we build it beyond this? This is good, but as Harry and Michael and others were saying, 25,000 young adults out on the land is a good start. But a lot of us had hopes that it would be bigger than that. And it can be bigger than that. It comes down to, can we grow the support base, whether it's through additional public funding or even more importantly, through involving more sustainable private sector support for this. That's how we provide the incentive to the next administration to use this as the foundation and make this part of an even bigger picture. We have time for 2 questions, 2 observations, 2 responses. Okay, right over here. We'll go with Steve first.
Morning, I'm Steve Richer, and I represent in part the American Bus Association. Brings a lot of tours into the public lands. My question is directed at the FRC. We all know that Brand USA is doing a great job on promoting the public lands internationally. We know that the foundation is doing a great job promoting it for the centennial. Is it possible that the FRC could become a tourism marketing organization for domestic marketing to tourists in the future, so we have a long-term presence in the U.S. market?
Little question.
Well, I believe when I had stepped into the role, there was a little bit more definition added to this kind of gray territory where there was travel and tourism, and then there was recreation. And so the council has focused on outdoor recreation specifically, and I think is leaving some of the marketing to the travel and tourism office. Domestic travel and tourism and visitor use management is central to our framework. It's part of our visitor services cornerstone, but marketing isn't on our agenda as of now.
We have time for one more question or observation. Going once. Going twice. Well, the good thing is, these 3 aren't going to disappear. You have their addresses, their emails, their telephone numbers, and your list of participants. They're responsive, although, there are times when they're very busy and they can't get back to you that day. But let's stay engaged. Let's make sure the conversation that starts here about these important topics continues. So let me ask you to thank these 3 people for making up